But first, I want to thank the IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management and the Fisheries Expert Group, as well as the EBCD, European Bureau for Conservation and Development, of course, not only for organizing this useful dialogue, but also for their valuable contributions throughout the lifespan of this work on OECMs. And I think the work of the Fisheries Expert Group and the EBCD has been critical to this work. And in my view, I don't even know if we would have had the achievements that we're going to talk about now without their valuable substantive input. So indeed, a great thanks to them for their collaboration. I think, and I've said many times, I think there's probably nobody in the world who knows more about fisheries OECMs than Jake and Serge. So it's indeed my honor and pleasure to work with them and to be a part of this panel with them. So I'd also like to just give a quick note of thanks to my colleague Marketa Zakova here at the CBD, who helped put these slides together with me. So first we have to look at the background and the genesis of this term, this new acronym. I know in this international policy world, especially in the UN, we love acronyms. But this acronym is a very interesting and important one, and it emerges from Aichi Biodiversity Target 11. Now, Target 11, I think probably many of us are familiar with Target 11. It comes from the whole suite of the 20 Aichi biodiversity targets that were adopted by the CBD Conference of the Parties in 2010 with a 2020 deadline. And Aichi Target 11 was probably the most notable of all the targets, probably had the biggest profile, at least in my opinion, of all of the Aichi targets. And largely due to this, its quantitative nature, this conservation of 10% of coastal and marine areas. Now here I've broken the target down into its components. Normally it's just one long verbose sentence, as is the norm in the UN, but here it's broken down, and you can see the different components of both the qualitative and quantitative elements of the targets. And here you see where this term other effective area-based conservation measures came from, with the focus of Target 11 being on the conservation of 10% of marine and coastal areas through protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. Now, for a long time, we didn't really know what that meant. It was sort of a catch-all term. Of course, I think it meant different things to different people. And I think in the marine policy and in the fisheries world, we were familiar with the different types of area-based fisheries measures that do have these kinds of conservation benefits. But at least under the CBD, we didn't have an agreed upon definition and terminology and criteria until 2018, a bit late in the 10-year time span of the Aichi targets, but nonetheless, it was a valuable and important achievement under the CBD. And this was not easily gained. This was the result of very long, intensive technical discussions among a range of different experts, and also just pleased to note that our colleagues here on this call and IUCN Fisheries Expert Group were a major part of that conversation and coming to this point of where the COP was able to adopt a definition on OECMs and importantly, welcome also scientific and technical criteria for their identification. So of course, the COP decision also encouraged governments and stakeholders to identify and report OECMs. It requested the CBD Secretariat to support the identification of OECMs, and also welcomed the collaboration of IUCN and FAO and many others on that vein as well. But the definition there, it's again rather long, but it's rather simple. It's a geographically defined area other than a protected area, which is governed and managed in ways that achieve positive and sustained long-term outcomes for the in situ conservation of biodiversity, with associated ecosystem functions and services, and where applicable, cultural, spiritual, socioeconomic, and other locally relevant values. Now, I think this term, again, it's intending to capture a range, the definition is intending to capture a range of different important factors and facets of this topic that are perhaps better explained in the OECM criteria, which I'll get to in a moment. But just to give an overarching perspective on the role of OECMs in the context of area-based conservation. So first, just to acknowledge that we know that protected areas are a very powerful tool for area-based conservation and have been sort of the main tool in most places for achieving area-based conservation objectives, but they're not the only tool. We know that there are other types of area-based management tools and approaches such as spatial sectoral regulation, indigenous managed areas, privately managed areas. These other types of tools also can have important biodiversity benefits. In some cases, they can overcome the weaknesses of protected areas, and for example, related to difficulty for enforcement and implementation and monitoring. And they can complement protected areas as part of systems and networks of area-based conservation, areas for conservation to achieve broader conservation goals. So the main message here is that OECMs provide a really important opportunity. First, to recognize and account for biodiversity outcomes of area-based measures that are not recognized presently as protected areas. So acknowledging the good work that's being done by area-based conservation measures that are meeting these criteria that I'm going to introduce shortly. But it also provides an incentive for many different types of area-based measures that may not presently be sustainable. It provides a bit of something to reach towards, just to look at how we can shift practices that are not presently sustainable to those that can yield long-term conservation benefits. So it provides a bit of a, it's a label, so to speak, to say, this measure does achieve these objectives and does align and does these valuable things. And again, an incentive for others that may not presently do that to actually make some steps to move in that direction. Now, the COP also welcomed and agreed upon a set of criteria for the identification of OECM. So really, for an area to be considered or have the label of an OECM, it needs to have all of these criteria. And I'm not going to read them all in detail. I don't have much time for that. But just to say again, these are the result of long, intensive expert discussions across a range of issues and considerations, and by a wide range of stakeholders. So it was certainly not arrived at easily. So the first, obviously, is that it's not a protected area. It's not recognized or reported as a protected area. And in fact, it may have been established for another function. Criteria B speaks about the governance and management of the area. Well, first, that it is a geographically delineated and defined area. It's an area. It's not just a measure that exists in a broad space. It has legitimate governance authority, meaning that the governance that's in place for that area actually has the authority to achieve the objectives that it says it does. And this also includes governance by indigenous peoples and local communities, and that governance being self-identified, of course, in accordance with national legislation and international obligations. We also have the criterion related to managed, that it's managed in ways that achieve positive and sustained outcomes, that relevant authorities and stakeholders are involved, and that a management system is in place to actually do this. Moving on, we have the outcomes, looking at criterion C. Is the area effective? The area achieves or is expected to achieve positive and sustained outcome for the in situ conservation of biodiversity. And the expected to achieve also in that vein relates to the timescales, sometimes the long timescales for us to actually visualize and be able to measure biodiversity outcomes. Sustained over the long term. The area is in place for the long term, or is likely to be. It in situ conservation. We know the specific biodiversity attributes that we need, that are important and that we need to conserve, and then looking at information and monitoring that those biodiversity attributes we have information on them. To the extent possible, we're monitoring them, we're measuring how changes are taking place, and we can look at the effectiveness and governance of the area as a whole. So we're not just saying that the area is doing something, we can actually know and measure to the extent possible that it is doing what we're saying, what it's being said. Finally, the associated ecosystem functions. So ecosystem functions and services are supported. This here acknowledges that there are a wide range of different types of values, services, and functions tied to ecosystems, and that management to enhance one particular attribute or service or function does not negatively impact the overall biodiversity. And finally, that the governance and management identifies, respects, and upholds cultural, spiritual, socioeconomic values, and it respects and upholds the local knowledge and practices and institutions that are fundamental for the conservation of biodiversity. Now, of course, as I said, the OECM concept emerged from the Aichi Biodiversity Targets, and the Aichi Targets expired last year. So why are we still talking about them? We are, because of course it was a major achievement that happened not that long ago in 2018, the actual solidification of the criteria and definition. But we also expect that it will play an important role in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So as many of you probably know, the CBD parties are currently negotiating this new framework, which will contain new global goals and targets for biodiversity. Presently, the draft framework has 4 outcome-oriented goals and 21 action-oriented targets, but this is still under negotiation under the open-ended working group on the post-2020 framework. But we expect and certainly hope that the framework will be adopted at the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the CBD in April-May 2022. Now, the framework has a wide range of different goals and targets that are related to objectives for conservation, sustainable use, and benefit sharing, access and benefit sharing, and speaks not only to the biodiversity sort of community, but to the broader global community and the role of biodiversity in supporting broader sustainable development objectives. But just as a snapshot, we can look at where OECMs can make a major contribution to the draft, to the framework, at least as it currently stands. So first on goal A, these are the outcome-oriented goals, looking at higher level objectives. We have the goal A speaking to the enhancing the integrity of all ecosystems. And of course, OECMs by conserving biodiversity features, they obviously contribute to enhancing the integrity of ecosystems. But also can be a very important tool for supporting nature's contribution to people under goal B. So here, of course, we're talking about OECMs in the context of sustainable use of fisheries management. So in that vein, OECMs can not only support the ecosystem services that emerge from the biodiversity functions that we're protecting, but also ensure that resource use is sustainable and can also uphold local rights and values of the areas and the ecosystems that they're a part of. Now, moving on, we can look at just some of the relevant draft targets. These are just a few that we pulled out here. Of course, looking at the third bullet point there, OECMs are in the draft target 3 on area-based conservation in the same way that they were in Aichi Target 11. But OECMs will also and could also be an important part of achieving target 1 on spatial planning. Of course, area-based measures should be integrated into broader spatial planning frameworks and broader objectives for the marine environment. Draft target 2 on ecosystem restoration, managing areas through OECMs, eliminating threats can allow for the recovery and restoration of marine and coastal areas. Draft target 5 on harvest, trade, and use of wild species, ensuring that it's sustainable, legal, and safe. Obviously, this makes sense here since area-based fisheries management measures are a well-entrenched part of sustainable fisheries management. And then also on draft target 9 on sustainable use and benefit sharing, ensuring that the benefits can emerge and benefits for people, including nutrition, food security, medicines. Again, OECMs are a key tool for ensuring the provisioning of the benefits, ensuring that those benefits can continue to emerge from ecosystems and that they can do so in a sustainable way. So to wrap up here, the main messages that I just wanted to get across is that OECMs provide a valuable opportunity to better understand and recognize the diverse types of area-based management tools that are tangibly contributing to biodiversity. They also provide an opportunity, an incentive to shift sectoral practices to be biologically sustainable, and can attract further support, either financial support, technical support, to enhance management and to improve biodiversity monitoring. So basically getting that label in many ways can be a way to get more support to actually improve what you're doing. So overall, we see OECMs as a very powerful tool to achieve global biodiversity goals. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joseph. Without losing too much time, I think I would share my screen for the second presentation on OECMs. And because we are a bit late on our time, I will hack my presentation to try to recuperate the time we need. So let me share my screen. Oops, where is it? I don't see it, sorry. What's happening? I'm sorry, I don't see my PowerPoint screen. I don't know where it is. I see it on my screen, but I don't see it here.
Do you want me to have your presentation open? Do you want me to open share on my screen?
Yes, I don't understand why I see it, and if I share it, I don't see it in the sharing. Can you just put it on?
Yeah, I'll do that.
I don't understand. Okay, can you open it? Okay.
Just let me know. I'll by clicking next.
Yeah, I will tell you, but that's fine. So yeah, I will tell you because I have to just give up a few slides. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard, the CBD Decision 14.8 that established OECMs and created the definition, etc. It calls on states to mainstream OECMs in all relevant economic sectors, including fisheries, to identify and possibly increase their contribution to biodiversity conservation. FEG has started working on OECMs because we have been asked by the CBD Secretariat to come and consider the implications of OECM for fisheries. So in a way, we owe to CBD the fact that we are talking about this today. Next slide, please. I will jump that slide because you've heard already about OECM. So I will go to the next one. And we'll just say that when you consider fisheries, OECMs in fisheries, like any other area-based fishery management, OECMs might be located in the various oceanographic domains and jurisdictions in which fisheries operate. They can operate in deep waters, and the fishery closures might be vertical, covering the bottom and the entire water column above it, like I see in yellow in the picture. The OECM might also be horizontal, like on land, covering only the bottom or the surface and part of the water column, as required to generate the expected outcome. In fact, different management zones may be created in a vertical OECM by regulating the gears allowed to operate into it. I mean, for example, trawling may be totally prohibited on the bottom, while midwater trawls and purse seines might be allowed on the subsurface. Next slide. There are many reasons to mainstream OECMs in fisheries: to assess and increase the biodiversity conservation benefits produced by area-based management, to further reduce or mitigate the collateral impact of fisheries on biodiversity, to further incentivize the consideration of biodiversity outcomes in the design of area-based management, to improve ecological connectivity in regional conservation networks, to strengthen the economic approach to fisheries, to improve the likelihood that states might meet their 30 by 30 commitment in 2030, and finally, to repair the image of fisheries with the public and consumers. As usual, it is important to stress that perceived or real costs and benefits in mainstreaming will affect the buying and compliance by the actors. Next slide. The guidance on identification and use of OECMs is available from the CBD itself, from WCPA, from FAO, more recently from ICES, and from the Fisheries Expert Group. The fisheries guidance has been presented to CBD workshops and tested in an FAO CBD FEG meeting at FAO in 2019. It has also been tested at an ICES FEG meeting in 2020, on which I will briefly report. This guidance will be further tested in the North Atlantic by NEAF, the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission, very soon, and by CBD with FEG inputs in the wider Caribbean. It will also be tested by FAO in many other regions. Next slide. So as I said, the guidance we have prepared was tested in the Northeast Atlantic in 2020 in a meeting jointly organized by the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea and FEG. 5 case studies of areas used in capture fisheries were examined, of different sizes, different biodiversity features, different measures in place, different jurisdictional authority, and different expected biodiversity benefits. I will, contrary to what I had prepared, I will not describe them briefly, but I will just go through them very quickly. If Liette just passes by the various slides, I will just name them. Next slide. So one of the area was the Rockall haddock box in the NEAF Caribbean, the Northeast Atlantic. This is the typical fishery measure with a lot of biodiversity values in it. Next. The Northeast UK sandhill closure, that's an area typically made to protect the food sources for seabirds nesting in northern Scotland. Next. The Corner-Rise seamount is a very classical piece of reef in the ocean with a lot of vulnerable marine ecosystems in it. Next. The Nafo Sponge VME closed area is also a series of VMEs that you see on the map, and it's in the middle of very important fishing grounds, already stressed by fishing. Next. The Lophelia Coral Conservation Area is important because this coral is a part, this place is a part, it's a tiny area, but it's the only place in the entire Canadian waters where this coral is still alive. Next. So in brief, the summary conclusion to which I will move is that the workshop found that for many of the OECM criteria, which are in the CBD decision, and they are in green on this table, the necessary information was available for these areas. It could easily be matched to the criteria, and it would lead to consider this criteria as met. In fewer cases, which are in yellow in the table, the information available was found to be incomplete, or the criteria was not considered clear enough. And all of this called for some additional guidance, more information, and more collaboration, for example, in ecological and social sciences. But in the end, no area was found to be not compatible with the criteria, showing perhaps that the pre-selection of those areas was carefully done. Next slide. Next slide. Yet. Thanks. Many mainstreaming issues that we met in fisheries for OECMs are common probably to all. No, sorry, the preceding slide. The preceding slide, please. Okay, thank you. Many of the issues we meet in fisheries OECMs are going to be common to all OECMs in any sector. These issues may include, for instance, the central role of national enabling frameworks, whether they are legal, political, policy or financial. The challenges of participative governance, legitimate authority, and identification of stakeholders, the means for implementation and capacity building, the problem of ensuring the actors' buy-in and compliance, the allocation of space and of resources, the cross-sectoral coordination where relevant, the problem of data limitations and mobilization of local knowledge, the need for multidisciplinary assessments, and the issue of decision-making under uncertainty and risk. All of these issues have specific aspects when they are considered in marine capture fisheries. For example, because of the ocean opacity to the human eye, for its variability in time and space, for the resulting complex dynamics and distribution of species life cycle, for the mobility of oceanographic structures which support the ecosystems, and hence the mobility of the biodiversity assemblages that we have to protect, the more complex trophic chains in the ocean. Also, and importantly, the most crucial importance of the vertical dimension, the depths in which most of the biomass is concentrated. Also, the diversity of aquatic domains from the shallow inland and coastal waters to the deep seas, and the multiple legal jurisdiction that exist under UNCLOS, which, when they are combined with species mobility, explain the particularly central role and challenge of international collaboration for OECMs in the oceans. Next slide. This is my last slide. And in conclusion, I would stress again that mainstreaming OECMs in fisheries is a golden opportunity for the win-win collaboration between fisheries and biodiversity conservation, both at national, regional, and local levels. In many areas, OECMs can be implemented by adding fairly little to existing frameworks, processes, and measures. Considering how slowly the Aichi Target 11 has been approached, boosting the identification of OECMs in fisheries is probably the only way through which many states may be able to meet their 30 by 30 commitment in the ocean at an affordable political, financial, and social cost. The process has started slowly in a few leading states and should be rapidly generalized, empowering coastal communities and strengthening management partnerships and capacity building in developing countries. The reaction of the fishery sector to the opportunities and challenge offered by OECMs is still uncertain, and the actors may be waiting for the state to provide the enabling framework they needed to proceed. I thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to ask Jake now if he can take the floor for the discussion on the GBF. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Serge. And if the secretary has my slide and can put it up, it would be helpful, but not essential. In the coming year, the Fisheries Expert Group is going to coordinate a new initiative, and it was foreshadowed by the introduction that Joe gave us on the global biodiversity framework. Under the now expired Aichi Biodiversity Targets, fisheries had a target, target 6, which I was hoping you could see on the screen. I sent it in to you a couple days ago. Does anybody have it to show, please? It will make this much easier.
Find it.
I'm going to try to find it.
Okay, well, the point with target 6 is that it is a very specific target solely about one sector that uses biodiversity and uses biodiversity quite intensively. That's fisheries. And it is quite explicit in what it expects. Thank you very, very much. This is target 6. It was among the first of the targets on which consensus was achieved in Nagoya back in 2010. It looks like a lot of words, but all the words are meaningful. First of all, it includes all fish and invertebrate stocks, aquatic plants. It says they're managed and harvested sustainably, legally, which gets into the IUU, illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, and applying ecosystem-based approaches. So in that phrase, you have now a binding obligation on states and our regional fisheries management organizations to move their work into ecosystem-based approaches. And then it lists a set of outcomes that have to be delivered. Overfishing is avoided, recovery plans and measures are in place for depleted species. Fisheries have no significant adverse impacts on threatened species, vulnerable ecosystems. And that was a key phrase because significant adverse impacts is exactly the language that the United Nations had already adopted a few years before in its resolution 61-105, which has set standards for no significant adverse impacts on vulnerable marine ecosystems. And the meaning in application of significant adverse impacts had been worked out under guidance of the United Nations for what types of impacts were adverse and at what point they became significant. And then the final phase, the impact of fisheries on stocks, species, and ecosystems, so this gets into the food web dynamics, are within safe ecological limits. And safe ecological limits, again, was a very clear, intentionally chosen phrase, because for those of you based in Europe, you should be familiar with it because it's part of the European Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which had been adopted. And again, a great deal of effort had been invested in the expert community led primarily through ICES and the Joint Research Council to come up with very clear quantitative benchmarks for where safe ecological limits lay, how to determine them in case-specific things. So put together for the activity fishing, you have the outcomes that have to be delivered, the way management has to operate, and benchmarks for when those outcomes have been achieved. When we move to the, as Joe said, soon to be adopted, we all hope, global biodiversity framework, which replaces the Aichi targets, for a variety of reasons we can discuss in the discussion period if you wish, the decision was made not to have any sector-specific targets. They have the overarching goals that you saw in Joe's presentation, and he gave a sample of the types of targets that exist. These are much more broadly defined than any single activity like fishing. They're for biodiversity outcomes, however biodiversity is being put under pressure. And the feeling was it would be redundant and cause possibility of conflicts to then superimpose on these much more generic targets and goals, sector-specific ones at the same time. What that means is fisheries agencies, when we call them into account for their performance relative to biodiversity outcomes, under Aichi Target 6, what they were accountable for was very explicit, and benchmarks to show that they were not just going through the motions, but actually achieving the desired outcomes were clear. And we all know that on a global scale, fisheries performance everywhere is far from perfect. But this really gave the power under Target 6 to highlight where pressure could be put on fisheries management jurisdictions to improve their performance relative to the benchmarks. Now with the global biodiversity framework, we have to stand back and say, where within the GBF goals and targets will we be able to report on the fishery performance? What benchmarks and standards will be used specifically for fisheries? Because as Saraj stated in his talk quite correctly, there are some differences between marine and terrestrial systems that mean you cannot always synonymize exactly the same benchmarks on land and on sea. So the challenge remains, how are we going to hold fisheries accountable under the new global biodiversity framework? What reporting standards are we going to expect from fisheries management agencies? And with substantial support from a variety of perspectives now coming in, this is a project that some of us in FEG will lead, and we welcome partners in looking at the GBF as it is finalized to develop a reporting strategy where fisheries remains accountable for its biodiversity footprint and accountable using benchmarks and standards that are clearly and readily interpreted in some objective way, rather than being each individual perspective's subjective impression of what it should take. So that's the project we're going to undertake. I can't present results on it because the GBF itself is still a work in progress. But people who want to talk about where we could go with this, want to be part of it, we have a few minutes left of this hour, I believe, and I'm welcome to be part of a discussion of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of you. I should say it was very, very interesting. I'm very happy that you have been able to present. There are questions already in the Q&A. One that, Joe, you already have responded to, but if you want probably to just quickly elaborate on that question about the typology of IUCN for protected areas and the OECMs.
Sure, I'm happy to give speak a little bit more to what I wrote in the response to that, and also would welcome the views of others. I mean, I think this kind of a question did emerge, and the question is let me just bring it up here. Riley Pullum asked, why was the OECM term needed, given that IUCN already has a typology of protected areas that reflects varying degrees of protection? Indeed, that's certainly a valid question, something that emerged when we started this work, and probably was asked back in the day that Aichi Target 11 was negotiated as well. And I wasn't there, but Jake was there, so maybe he can tell you. But overall, I mean, we did see the OECM term was there, and it could have sat there and not had anything done around it if there wasn't a need to. But there was a real demand, in fact, from many of our parties who first were as we heard, were struggling with how they could get to the area-based conservation goals. But secondly, had a number of areas that exist in different forms that are not protected areas, that either the managers of those areas, whether it's indigenous peoples and local communities or the governments of those areas, did not want to call them protected areas. There's a lot of connotations that come with calling something a protected area. So, but in doing that, we were sort of, these areas were existing outside of the fold of the global picture of area-based conservation. So we needed to do something to bring those into the conversation, bring those into this global picture, because they do in many places have tangible benefits that we're not accounting for because we're only looking at protected areas. So although, and we do have to remember that in different places, calling something a protected area or reporting something as a protected area, very importantly, does have implications for the governance and management of that area and things that some places, some stakeholders, local stakeholders may not want. But anyway, that's my view on that, but I leave it up to other panelists if they want to, of course, flesh that out in more detail. Yeah.
If I can, I'll speak just for a minute, and thank you, Joe. You gave a really good summary. For those of us who were at Nagoya, I'd started talking about Target 6. It was one of the first adopted. Target 11 was either the last or next last, and it was late at night on the penultimate evening in Nagoya when they finally got consensus on the phrasing. Because as Joe said, if there was a time when Target 11 started with just protected areas, but there were so many things wrong with that phrase all alone that the issue was what else goes in. And they certainly did talk about some of the specific elements in the typology that's been developed by the IUCN. But there was no combination of elements from that typology, which together would have the flexibility to bring in all the different ways that different levels of governance, different kinds of sectors work to try to conserve and protect, where it's appropriate, biodiversity. So they in fact negotiated that whole phrase in one of the largest breakout groups I've ever had the either privilege or misfortune, depending on how early in the day or late at night it was, to have been part of. And key things are effective and conservation. And this is one of the things that was essential in getting it adopted and makes it different than marine protected areas. In most jurisdictions that have the power to create marine protected areas, the act of creating it is sufficient to say it exists and report it. For OECMs, the constraint that made it palatable to get consensus was effective conservation. There has to be evidence available that it's actually delivering some identifiable biodiversity outcomes. And that's why that phrase ended up being the one that could get consensus when a whole lot of other ones didn't. It had that standard of evidence and the requirement that you had to have evidence that there was some conservation benefit over and above whatever the user applying it might otherwise want for it. So that's why they ended up with that phrase rather than any other.
Thank you. I think it will link to the next question, in fact, very well, which is it anticipated that the declaration of OECMs would be preceded by a pilot phase during which one would test if the anticipated benefits translate into real biodiversity benefits? And the reason is the benefits anticipated through regulation rather than prohibition. And the monitoring and the demonstration of biodiversity outcome is really limited in protected area. And this is likely to transcend into the OECMs. So the monitoring of biodiversity in OECM, how is it going to work, especially in the fisheries?
I can try to assist. I think Jake can complement. We have to remember, this is something that many people don't understand. We have to remember that what the decision requires is that we have a look at whether all the areas which are already used in fisheries, called area-based fishery management measures, which have been established to protect species or habitat or whatever, whether they produce biodiversity benefits and what biodiversity benefits they produce. So in reality, if the area has been there already for 25 years, you should have some evidence that there are some benefits in there. And one big part of the problem is show what are those benefits, describe them, quantify them if possible, and there should be information for that, or it should be collected. Now, what we expect also is that if an existing area-based measure in fisheries is requalified as an OECM because it meets quite well the criteria, there is an incentive for that area to do even better, and perhaps at little cost, doing things that were not foreseen before, was not thought about. But after all, if we do the work and create an OECM, let's do it better. And that can happen in various ways, like merging two area-based management measures in one and becomes more effective, or increasing the dimension a little bit, or whatever, or changing some of the measures inside. So we don't start from scratch on an area that you have to demonstrate. You should have already a lot of information. Another point which is important is, like, if you take some of the examples I passed on very quickly on the vulnerable marine ecosystems, it's very easy to go there and see that you have a nearly intact ecosystem. There are plenty of corals and sponges and plenty of animals. So the assumption is, if you close that area and you eliminate any destructive gear from there, that biodiversity, which is there, you can see it, you can show it, will be maintained. As long as the area is in force and you can show that and demonstrate that, you can assume that the biodiversity is maintained, and you just have to come, let's say, from time to time, maybe 5 years or something, and have a check to see that this is really happening. One interesting question is, can a fishery, can you have a new OECM in a fishery in an area that never existed before, like a corridor for migration or something like that? Obviously, if the OECM was there to protect migration of some species, it may protect also the migration of other species. But otherwise, it would be a coincidence that an area-based management measure happens to be a good corridor for some species. And in that case, it might have an effect. If not, it might have to be considered as a new area. And that, in that case, the question that is raised is a good question. Now, how do you prove that that area will be effective? One very difficult point that we have to keep in mind all the time is this idea of showing that they are real. In complex ecosystems, demonstrating the direct connection, demonstrating the direct causality between the measure you took and the effect you get is not very easy. So we will have this challenge all the time, as you have it in MPAs.
Yeah, that's good.
Very quickly on that, to add to Serge's point, I was co-chair of the workshop that ICES and FEG co-sponsored. And what I can say is all the areas that were looked at required evidence of the biodiversity outcomes to be available in the report out for the workshop. In each case, the type of monitoring that would be expected in order for the biodiversity benefit to continue to be demonstrated was laid out. What happens if countries don't do what is expected? That is a challenge that lies ahead. The other challenge that has not yet been encountered that we need to plan about collectively is what happens if you have an area identified as meeting the OECM criteria due to measures in one sector, and a different sector comes in and begins to harm the same biodiversity. And it could be a transportation issue, pollution, deep sea mining, whatever. These are some challenges that lie ahead for us. And it may well be that the integrated nature of the global biodiversity framework will provide some guidance on how to deal with that. But right now, to my knowledge, there's no structures in place which give us the guidance on how to deal with those problems when inevitably they will be encountered in some places, which at the time they were identified were perfectly good OECMs with demonstrably good outcomes. But circumstances may change. Heaven knows, we may even face climate change.
Yeah. It's important to note that OECMs can be delisted very easily. The same way they are listed, they can be delisted. So in theory, the risk to have a pile of paper OECMs should remain relatively low because it's easy to delist them if they don't perform as they are expected to perform, I guess.
There's just no framework to do it.
So there's still a lot of work to be done still on getting that organized. And we have still a few questions, which the next one I really like because I'm thinking about one biosphere reserve that we have in Canada that was asking how to move from protected terrestrial, protected area to gradually have a part of the coastal and the sea being protected as well, knowing that they didn't expect to be a marine protected area. And it's would the wildlife migratory corridor be counted as OECM? And I'm thinking especially the coastal area where you would have waterfall, for example. But they have, going further in as well because many of them are moving that way. But also I'm thinking the corridor for whales, for example, and all these components that in many cases needs to also be protected. And the same for the seals, for example.
I suppose I can jump in here. I'm sure others have views as well, but in principle, the OECM net can be cast very widely, provided that the areas that are seeking that label meet the criteria. And one of those criteria being that they are, geographically delineated, that it's an area. So this is also a bit of this harkens back to a kind of a question and some discussions that we had along the lines when we were developing the OECM, when the OECM concept was being further elaborated, is delineating where something is simply a good sustainable fisheries measure versus where it is relevant and applicable to Aichi Target 11 and to area-based conservation. So there was often this, is it target 6 on fisheries or is it target 11? Is it both? Is it neither? So that's an important question. And again, to say that something doesn't qualify as an OECM or doesn't qualify as a protected area doesn't mean it doesn't have biodiversity benefits. It just means maybe the context in which we're looking at it, in particular in this case, from an area-based management perspective, is an important aspect of that categorization. And in fact, I mean, there can be many examples of flyway stopover points and things like that where they can be a part of that. And also just to note as well, that as is always the case as generally the case with CBD mechanisms and processes and tools, it's intended and set out to be rather flexible to respond to a range of situations, a range of contexts, and a range of capacities and information available. So, and that's why, in fact, the guidance says it's to be applied in a flexible way, adapting to different circumstances. So, in principle, yes, if it meets the criteria and if it hits all those different points, and even if it doesn't mean it's not contributing to other relevant targets under the framework.
Mm-hmm. So, I think we have, I know that we have only a few minutes. We may have to go a little bit longer if it's okay for everybody, because I think the discussion is quite interesting. So I like it. I should say I had probably another 5 questions, but I will limit still. And the next 2 questions, which arrive exactly at the same time and are talking about the same topic. It's about deep sea mining and the threat and the challenges that they can have, because Sergio, you were mentioning that the OECM can be at different level. So it may complexify, and even you kind of alluded to the challenge of OECM probably good in one thing, but not working in another component. So I don't know if you want to discuss, reflect on the issue, because deep sea mining has been, and as you know, we even have motions at IUCN that have passed around deep sea mining and looking at that. So how would you consider that, especially in the context of the fisheries to be protected in many cases as well?
So maybe I just wanted to jump in here as well, and I'm sure in more detail our esteemed experts can get into, but this, this illustrates what I think is another powerful benefit of the OECM concept, is that it not only gives, when we're talking about it from a sectoral perspective, of course, there can be OECMs that are not specific to a sector, and they may be, a privately managed area or something like that are not a sectorally managed area. But let's constrain ourselves to this sectorally managed approach in the context of fisheries. It not only accords them and gives them the label when they have an OECM, it not only gives them the label and the sort of positive thumbs up sticker, it also gives them some responsibility and some stewardship over that area to not only manage what they're doing for the initial purpose they were intending to do, but also to look out for the biodiversity benefits that they got that label for, and to monitor those benefits and understand. So when you do that, you're not only saying, okay, this is great, now you're responsible for it. So it puts the ball in the court of those sectoral authorities that have sought and gained that label, to then look out to what other sectors may be adversely impacting the features that they have gained this label for. So we have to remember that the OECM concept emerged from Target 11 and is embedded again in the draft target on area-based conservation, which is saying the area is conserved. And also remember that the initial impetus for this was that there are many areas where there's only one pressure threat that is really impacting the system. And if you can manage that, then you're doing good. But if there's other things that are happening, they need to be dealt with. And you can't realistically say that the area is achieving that target. So in the context of deep sea mining or any one sector, you can look at that specific sector taking advantage and using this OECM concept. So I can't speak in great detail about the deep sea mining approaches, but if they can have an area that's an area-based management tool that is delivering conservation outcomes that can be sought by that individual sector. But if there are other sectors that sought and gained that OECM label for an area that they're measuring, and they suddenly start to become impacted by another sector, that does give them an additional impetus and basis to let's say, go to a higher governance authority or work with that other sector, or go to a higher governance authority to try to deal with those impacts. But I'll stop there. Thanks.
Jake wants to talk.
Very quickly, because I think this is one of the issues where our thinking about protected areas has been largely shaped by living on the surface of the land, where most of the biodiversity is right on the surface of the land or a few tens of meters above it. The ocean is a three-dimensional body with biodiversity in all 3 dimensions. And deep sea mining is one of the challenges that we all need to think about more seriously. Right now, I think the knee-jerk reaction appropriately in a lot of the biodiversity community is, let's just not go there altogether. We've seen what mining can do on land. We don't want to just export it to the ocean. But are we ready to say that if there were to be deep sea mining occurring a few thousand meters down on the seafloor, the incentives that made some really effective conservation measures for, let's say, in latitudes where pelagic tuna and other pelagic species are really benefiting from the measures that getting credit as an OECM? Have we just dissipated all the value of those measures being applied in the pelagic part of the water system of the ocean? And those are choices that we are all going to have to face a lot sooner than many of us want to. And they're going to be complex discussions. But simply saying the presence of an activity that does have detrimental impacts on biodiversity anywhere in the water column means the entire water column can no longer be considered to benefit from conservation, could end up being a pretty strong disincentive for measures. It's nice to hope, as Joe laid out very clearly, this is a positive incentive to build stronger coalitions across sectors. But if some of the things required as we move to implement some of the things that are just being talked about in Glasgow last week, if we're going to move away from fossil fuels, the demand for minerals that are needed in electronic batteries and things like that are readily available in the deep sea, we're going to have some very complex challenges facing us soon. And saying these pressures disincentivize responsible fisheries behavior could make things worse, not better.
Yeah, that's a good point. Serge?
Yeah, just not much. Just one thing about deep sea mining, of course, is usually a lot of the deep sea mining is going to be much deeper than where the fisheries go. So direct contact is very unlikely, but oil and gas and other activities, yes, the conflict may happen. And I agree with Jake in that case that you can see that positively or negatively. The positive view is to think that then biodiversity will be defended not only by the biodiversity champions, but by fishery champions as well, because the people damaging the biodiversity will be damaging livelihoods and ecosystem services. So that alliance might be strong. And there are some examples already of I think Jake told me that in places where there were biodiversity to protect mammals, and the fishermen were using pots with ropes with the risk of entanglement, etc. And then the fishermen can cancel their ropes, change systems so that there is no more entanglement. But at the same time, they discovered that 90% of the mortality was due to high-speed tankers in the same areas. So in that case, what happens? Well, is that the two sectors can talk together and make sure that the navigation comes down by about 20 kilometers or 20 miles an hour when they cross the OECMs. So there may be some possibility of cross-sectoral negotiations directly by the sectors. And then we also have, of course, marine spatial planning, etc. In the case of deep sea mining, one of the problems is the plumes. I believe that these plumes are going to walk around for 1,000 kilometers, and then you could be an OECM at 500 kilometers from the mining, and it will be affected still by pollution. So this is going to be a big challenge. Yeah. I think that there is one thing that we haven't thought about, but I have seen or perceived, is that, for instance, some sectors might in fact use OECMs as a way to exclude other sectors from where they are. And I have seen this tendency in renewable energy. The companies that put turbines, the fishermen would like, they have been kicked out of the turbine area, but they would like to come and fish around the turbines. And the turbine company say, no, this is an OECM. Now, all the biodiversity around the turbines is protected, so don't come here and mess up with my turbines. And before they were saying, don't mess up with my turbines. Now they may say, you don't mess up with my turbines and my biodiversity. So you have a good case where you could have an alliance that works in the right direction, let's say.
Yeah, this is quite interesting. I think we have a lot more discussion possible. I was thinking